Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Morning Coffee Review. Of course, this is our Espresso Yourself edition. That's why we've got a special guest today. So we're going to have a fun, engaging conversation, which is going to lead to more conversations, and that's how we roll. So before we get started, I'll always like to say hello to Michael. How you doing today, my friend?
Doing good. It's finally starting to cool down. We had our window open last night, laid the winter rye, got a nice sunburn from being out in the sun, which hasn't happened in a little bit. So excited. Weather's starting to cool down. I'm excited for the winter months to happen and all the things around that. AU transition just happened for Bluebeam for those folks. And anyone wondering about the different tiers, I posted a video a little earlier about those to explain what is offered in all three tiers. But other than that, it's doing good. Today, we're excited to have Brian on. It was the last minute. We were able to rope him in. Well, Jason did. Jason did all legwork, so I won't say anything. We appreciate that, Brian. But how are you doing today, Brian?
I'm doing great. Yeah, looking forward to some good conversations here.
Yeah, so conversation is sort of where this whole thing started, right? So we've been looking at having different co-hosts and have different folks join us on Espresso Yourself. And I was looking at the calendar, and for the past, I don't even want to know how many years now, there's always been a placeholder on my Tuesdays on for a certain civil chat that happens on Tuesdays and the first Tuesday of the month. And I was like, you know who would be good for this? Maybe Brian Hailey. And so Brian, you've been a part of my career for a number of years through different means, and it's nice to finally have you. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and let's give this a little of explanation just so new folks that are maybe joining in. Again, every other Tuesday we have an Espresso Yourself, and that is talking with folks from the community and from the industry. So if you are tuning in, you're looking for more of that instructional demo conversation and asking us questions about review. We do those the other Tuesdays, and we do post. So if you do register, you do get an invite that tells you what our topic is. Just so you're aware, we don't want to. I know some of you have posted before that there's not technical content. You can't listen into these ones. That's okay. We understand that. So if you do need to depart, now you can. But we would love to have you listen in and ask Brian questions as well. But I'll pass it back to Jason just because I want to make everyone aware. I don't want you to be here and then be frustrated. We're transparent. We're honest. So.
Yeah. And if you do have a question that needs immediate answering, hop over to our LinkedIn group. There's a Morning Coffee Review LinkedIn group. Feel free to ask questions there, or if any questions get put in the chat today, we'll go ahead and address them over there if we can. But yeah, it's been fun. We're already into October, so that deadline did pass. If you needed more licenses, it's too late now.
Oh, man, I wish somebody had told me.
Right? I wish somebody would told you, right? We get in trouble for telling you, and then we get in trouble for not telling you. So it is what it is. But Brian, I'm excited to have you on here. As I was sort of hinting earlier, it's the first Tuesday of the month, which means exactly what happens on the first Tuesday of the month.
So we have a civil chat. So civil chat is your opportunity. It's very similar to what y'all have been doing here for Morning Coffee Review, but basically it's just think of it like a call-in radio show where we take questions on any Autodesk civil engineering related software questions you may have, and we do our best to answer them.
Now you say you've got a cohort there sometimes.
I have a co-host. His name is Brian as well. And then so it started off with Brian Mackey and myself doing it, and then we roped Brian Tomasi in. So Brian Tomasi is a CAD manager for Tetra Tech, and so he's been helping us out with more the answering things, because it's always nice to get different perspectives on things.
Mm-hmm.
He has knowledge in areas that I don't. I have knowledge in areas that he doesn't. So we make a pretty good team. I've known Brian for a dozen years. He used to live in Loveland before he moved up to the Northwest. And so, yeah, we have a good time. He's a great guy, super knowledgeable.
So that happens.
David, there's 3 Brians.
That happens every Tuesday or every
first Tuesday of each month.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have a link once a month.
Do you have a link to that for the folks that are in here from the civil?
You'd think I had that ready, wouldn't you?
You're good.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to post that, So folks, if you are in the civil world and you want some questions answered, you can jump in on that every first Tuesday of every month.
Yep. So I put it in the chat. So 11:30 Mountain Time, lasts about an hour, and it's like we just have fun. I typically show off something to start with, just show something off to while people are typing in their questions, and then everything else is driven by people's questions. So if there's no questions, it's just listening to Brian and I talk.
There you go. Now, Brian Mackey, he's not a civil person. He brings up that R word every now and then.
The R word, yeah.
And
the Revit.
And so that works out kind of funny. But I've tuned into I don't know how many of those over the years, and they're always entertaining. And I appreciate the knowledge that you share.
Yeah.
So
and we try to make it so that it's, we're not selling anything. There's no advertising. It's just me giving back to the community that's given me so much, is the way I like to think about it. I learned so much when I was first getting into Civil 3D from the forums, from blog posts, from YouTube videos, from webinars, that it's just kind of my way of giving back.
Because I know we've interacted many times over the years on the Autodesk forums and some of the other ones that are out there. And that's very interesting to put it as giving back, because like so many of us, learn from the forums and YouTube and blog posts and webinars and stuff like that. And that calling to give back is pretty noble. I never thought of it that way, but that's very cool. So you've been doing this for a while. Where did you get your start? Like, how did you become a civil engineer?
So in high school, I was good at math, and the STEM fields always seemed to come easier to me than the more liberal arts things like English, and I hated poetry. Right? couldn't do it. And so I started looking at different things, and I was like, engineering, that sounds cool, I'll do that. And then I started looking at all the different engineering things, and I'm like, electrical engineering, yeah, you really don't get to see that, but with civil engineer you get to see it. And then I realized that I'm designing storm sewers.
Fair.
Right.
I mean, you
but
get to see
it's something tangible, right? And so right out of high school, I still wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, so I spent a couple years in the Army. They helped me pay for college, made it through college, and then went to work for a general civil engineering firm. Did residential subdivision design for about 8 years, got my license, and then Civil 3D came out. And the company I was working with decided they weren't going to make the switch to Civil 3D. And so I left and joined the reseller channel.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So with that being said, when the transition didn't happen, was that one of those eras where you kind of saw the writing on the wall that Civil 3D was going to be
definitely
the solution for you?
I remember, when I was heavy into the design, doing inland desktop, laying in bed, awake, thinking to myself, why is it that when I move a line, I have to go through and recalculate all the contours and relabel all the contours and redo all the profiles and redo all the cross sections? It should just do it. And then I saw Civil 3D just do it. And
right.
that was what made the switch for me.
So since you've been around for that time, how long do you feel like it took the industry to completely adopt? Because now, from my experience in terms of talking with folks, and I learned Civil 3D from an academic sense, how long do you think it took the industry to finally fully adopt it? Because right now it seems more kind of a staple that if you're in that world, you are using Civil 3D.
Yeah. So when did it come? So Land Desktop's last version was 2009, I believe.
Right.
So that was when they last stopped, making Land Desktop. So it was right about that time, a little bit after. I think it was when the full adoption really hit. They came out with the 2004 preview release of Civil 3D, and they said, "Here, try this." Basically, it was an entire customer base beta test, right? Which was great. And then 2005 came out, and they said, "Hey, it's ready to use it," and it wasn't ready. And then 2006 came out, and they're like, "Oh, now it's really good. Go ahead." And and then finally, I think around 2007, 2008 is when it really became a viable program for engineers to use. And that's about the time that I made the switch into the reseller channel. So,
Yeah,
it's
'cause
funny, 2 years ago, or not even 2 years ago, I would say probably 2 times a year, I encounter firms who are still using Land Desktop. And they're
wow.
like we've been putting it off, but I think it's time to finally learn Civil 3D. And it's always like, all right, hold up. Are you still using a flip phone? No, no, no. I've got the new iPhone, So why, for 40 hours a week, why would you be using old technology? It's the most frustrating thing ever. And then they get frustrated that you have to learn and train it. Like, well, everybody else in your industry has been on this since about 2010.
Right.
You're 13 years behind. You can't just get caught up overnight. And it's just shocking to me how some of that sort of resistance, and I wonder if that comes from more being how civil lags behind architecture.
Well,
Technically,
that's why I'm talking.
Mhm.
Sorry, not talking. It's
Mhm.
early. What I was thinking right now, right? Like, so if it was such a quick adoption for Civil 3D, and you're talking, Brian, more about that parametric information, right? If you're able to change a corridor, is it updating
Mhm.
everything that's co-signing? Why is it still taking so long for people to adopt Revit? Because it's the same type of mindset. You don't have to go through and change cross sections, elevations if you're changing something in plan. When actually it is, I just looked it up because I wanted to know the cost difference. It is $155 cheaper than Civil 3D.
Revenus?
Yeah, wild to me. So think about that comparison, right? Because Civil 3D is predominantly adopted now, right?
Mhm.
Whereas Revit, that's not the case. Some folks still think, and I have strong opinions about this, that they're going to be a successful company if they just maintain using AutoCAD as their design suite.
Yeah. It was like, I remember one time on the forum, somebody had asked the question, and this was years ago. Somebody had asked, hey, this company is not willing to pay for the 3D model. So how do I use Civil 3D to do a 2D model? And my response back was if they are mandating that I don't do 3D, I'm going to have to charge them more because it's going to take me longer to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's just that whole mind shift that 3D is more complex and it takes longer to do, when at this point in time, it doesn't. Sure,
It's
back in the day it did, but not now.
it's that uptick. I think that people are afraid to embrace that. For us, I always say it's 4 to 5 projects it takes to transition and see the ROI of that investment, right? 4 to 5
Right.
projects in Revit. So I don't know what it is for Civil 3D, but it's that same mindset that always boggles me when I'm having conversations, with clients. Where do you see your firm going in 3 to 5 years, right? And I would say I'm seeing the switch where it's not really a conversation. It's when is it going to happen? That transition, right? But we're reaching out a lot of folks in the industry right now that are going to retire and their mindset isn't in the future of their business. So we'll see that transition come to fruition here. But I believe in the next, 4 to 5 years, if your firm hasn't embraced some type of parametric modeling system, you will be outdated and not
Yeah, you'll just
receiving.
be over. You'll just be passed over.
Yep. Is that the same, would you say, for civil?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. If not now already, right?
Yeah. At this point, it's so much easier. Like I said, it's so much easier to do things parametrically than it is to not. That you just can't compete.
And I'm always
And whether
shocked
you're
by that.
using an Autodesk software or a Bentley program or whatever, you need to be in that parametric modeling mind. Yeah.
I always hear from clients or just customers or whomever else in the industry Like, yeah, we still do all of our stuff in AutoCAD. You know, we work with this one client and they request everything in AutoCAD, and that's just fine. Like, well, what happens when that one client says, hey, we need everything in Revit now, right? That little business that thrives on doing one particular thing in AutoCAD, they're not going to exist, right?
Yeah.
They're going to have to scramble, and by that time you're behind the 8 ball. And we've encountered other folks who are like, well, looks like it's time to retire. Like, that would just be just terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you keep your finger on the pulse of the industry that you're doing stuff? And that goes in perfectly with what David just mentioned in the chat. The DOTs are pushing 3D, right? Whether it be Civil 3D, I think there's 14 or 15 states that are on Civil 3D. The rest are on Bentley, but still they're pushing more 3D, more model, more parametric design for that exact reason. It's more efficient.
And what's the Bentley design? So we forget.
Open Roads Designer is their primary one now, I believe.
Okay. There was another one
office that's using that.
MicroStation.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so MicroStation is like AutoCAD, and Open Roads is like Civil 3D. So
Okay.
Compare the two. So MicroStation is their drafting program. Open Roads is the civil design.
And they've got open buildings, so they do have a Revit counterpart, and like it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I'm interested to see as we listen back to this tape, 3 to 5 years, 4 to 5 years, I would say at this point, from now, is that saying true, or are people still in that same thing where everyone's been saying that? But I feel the tide switching, and what really I think is the benefit is that the clients are starting to see the cost savings associated to 3D modeling in coordination and collaboration, and the GCs are seeing it too. So the benefit of construction as a whole is being realized and being pushed from those ends now versus the design end. So I feel that that's where the switch is really coming from. Once that is fully interpreted and expelled to us, then that switch will be kind of mandated that way.
Right. There was a question in the chat, well, can Civil 3D still do a 2D print? I'm like, well, yeah, you still have to do a 2D print from Revit or AutoCAD or Civil 3D to build something currently. But what's going to happen in say 5 years, Brian? Do you think that you're going to be able to just submit a model and have that be approved for construction?
That's a fascinating question. There's so many different aspects that a lot of people don't think about when it comes to submitting a model, right? Because right now, my model, I don't have to model everything perfect, because my final output is the PDF or the printed piece of paper, right? And so if I have a mistake in my model and it doesn't show up on the printed paper, who cares? It doesn't matter, right? Because that is my deliverable. Once we get into submitting 3D models, how accurate do we need to start modeling things? Right? And then you get the people like my brother, attorneys, that they get involved. And how does this whole process evolve after that? Like, okay, so I'm because right now we have the issue is like, okay, here are the construction documents. Oh, you want the 3D model as well? Here it is, but you can't really if there's something wrong with it, you can't blame me.
Right.
Now, if it's just here's the 3D model, what level of detail?
What is a deliverable?
Deliver to, all sorts of fun things like that I don't have answers for.
Yeah, I think right now modeling would be more of a handover to a client for maybe some FM solutions, right? Facility maintenance. That I think that's where
the owner
they're starting,
know where all the utilities are, so that they can, in the future, maybe do some clash detection for future things. But at that point, I would consider it, it's, you never actually want to use the design plans as-builts, because things change.
Yep.
I had a great example of that. This was probably about 10 years ago. A little hole opened up under I-25 in Denver, and this hole got bigger and bigger and bigger. There's a water main that was running underneath the interstate that sprung a leak. It was a small little water main. I think it was only like 64 inches or something like that. And the water department went out there to shut it off. So they went to one side of the interstate and turned the valve and shut it off, went over to the other side, and they had just recently paved over the street, paved over all the valve boxes. And so they went to the GIS system to get where the valve was. They went into that part and dug up the street, and no valve. So they actually had to go back and get the survey data from when it was built to find out where the valve was before they could turn this water off. And by that time, it had completely eroded out in the entire northbound lanes by 25. There's a big old sinkhole right in the middle of the interstate, shut down the interstate. And so it's things like that where you can't necessarily trust the record drawings or the design drawings, because things change when things get built. And so, yeah, you can use them. They'd be great handy, but, I would consider it to be GIS data. And you all know what GIS stands for, right?
Get it surveyed.
Right.
I was gonna tee you up for that one, because I figured that's a perfect explanation or use case for that one, right? Where in GIS it's supposed to be here, but in the real world it's over there.
Right. And and GIS is fantastic. I love GIS for preliminary planning, for figuring out what's there. But back in the day when we didn't have accurate data collection methods for GIS, he's like, oh, the manhole is in the intersection. Yeah, that's close enough. There's only one manhole there. Why do I have to show exactly where in the intersection it is? It's the manhole.
Exactly.
Little lag. No worries. There you go. You're back.
Okay. Sorry about that.
You're good. With that being said, do you think there is any rumor of 3D deliverables? But I think that like you were saying earlier, that true honest question is, well, what are we delivering? Needs to be thought out before that transition happens from portable document formats, which has been, and that's why I would agree with you. Most folks are like, why would we design in 3D if we're just gonna print out a set anyways, because that's what's going to be delivered. There's a lot of other benefits from the architecture, engineering, and mechanical, electrical, plumbing side, right? In terms of collaboration, coordination. From the architectural side, you get renderings, all those additional things that benefit that 3D aspect. But what would be a deliverable, right? Because we're from the structural world, we're not typically going through and doing a level development of maybe connections, right? And actually modeling connection points from there. Which I'm talking about AU and modeling connections. If anyone is attending AU and wants to learn how easy they are, but right, what is that deliverable? What are we then liable for of that delivery? I think would need to be answered.
Exactly.
And I think, I think it's Wisconsin DOT also asked for the model with their submittal. And I think it's almost one of those, I would see it as a check, right? If you give me a set of plans and give me the model, I'm going to go in the model and I'm going to start doing some sleuthing, right? Is your contour smoothing cranked up? Do you have some like fake brake lines? Do you have some errors? It might make me question the rest of the set of plans a little bit more if it's not modeled accurately, right? I might have a little bit more concern for the elevations or the inverts or something if they're fake versus driven by Civil 3D. What's standard text versus an actual Civil 3D label or vice versa. I think that's how I would use it if I were a reviewer, but I don't think we're at that point of actually being able to build from it. But I know a lot of in the civil world, we've got machine grading. So we've got, just take your XML file of your surface, kick it out to a tractor and let it do its thing. Like that's still very real. And that's been real for about 10 years, if not longer by now, but it's still a little concerning, even though we're talking about within an inch at that point. We are still just plugging it in and let it do its thing without any trust or check.
Yeah, I think it would have to be a shift from a software development as well, if that is going to be a mandate for what we're able to do within the software efficiently. Because as of right now, right, I don't see it being an efficient process as it's being built functionality with the software. So I think it would have to be both a functional switch and a deliverable switch of that. What are we delivering? Great. Then the software would have to be able to efficiently allow us to do it, right? For that higher end, because it comes down to fabrication, at least from our side. what are we able to provide from a fabrication sense within the design suite itself? And is that efficient enough to do what we need to for a deliverable? I think it'll have to be kind of a communication between software development and then also a deliverable between jurisdictions. I mean, you would
David
hope.
brings up a great point as well with the contractors. Like, I need to, bid this project.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So does that mean I have to know Civil 3D well enough to get in there and do a, quantity takeoff on the road sections, which is probably the most difficult thing to do in all of Civil 3D? Right.
Which would then become back full circle of a software development iteration into that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Brian, to be able to have that benefit as part of it if you're going to start mandating a deliverable from it. Now, do we see that? Is there any wishful thinking of it happening? Is anyone seeing the writing on the wall? Is that going to, you think we're at that point that's going to be a requirement?
I don't know.
I don't either.
But with 3D
question.
PDFs and with everything else, I mean, I'm sure there's people pushing for it, but I still think it's too far away to really start honestly considering it. But somebody's got to drive the initiative, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's too far away though? We're talking 5 years, 10 years, 15 years.
I would say 10. I'd say 10. And even then, there's always been a lag between the industries, civil versus architectural versus MEP, right? They're on their own schedule. So if architectural drives it, everybody else will have to catch up to them before it will be a thing. It's wild. It's wild. But it's still exciting. Civil engineering has been around forever, right? And we're still innovating here, in 2023, but the scale of that innovation has really dropped off. The frequency that an innovation is made, it's quite some time.
Yeah.
So with that, Brian, your civil chat, what, and you talked about, your road to where you're at now. What were some of the challenges you think of, looking back? Is there anything you would have done differently? Anything you wish that would have been provided to you to kind of expedite where you're at?
Oh, gosh.
Like if you're talking to someone new that's in the industry, is there some helpful tips that you would have loved to give your younger self?
I think one of the things that really benefited me, just not necessarily a tip for myself, but maybe a tip for other folks. If you want to get good at a subject, go online, find a forum for that subject, and start answering questions.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ask questions, answer the questions. Because what that does is that causes you to really think about the subject. That's what I was doing with Civil 3D. Is like people would ask questions. I'm like, I don't know. Let me go see if I can figure this out. And I would go research it and try to figure it out. And it would really drive me to learn the software. And then I would come up blank, and then somebody else would post up another answer. I'd be like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Right. So that's one bit of advice I always like to give folks is go answer questions. Right. If it goes back to the whole saying, it's like if you can teach the subject, then you know the subject. Right. You have to know the subject really well in order to be able to teach it. And you don't have to stand up in front of a classroom and teach. You can do it online with forums and LinkedIn groups and things like that.
Absolutely. I'm a forum junkie. So if it's a particular car that I own or a hobby that I have, I'm in the forums. It's a good way to learn, and it's a good way to engage your brain, right? Because you're going to come across something and you're like, I don't know, but looks like nobody else has answered this. Hey, I've got the free time. Let me go figure this out.
Right.
I think that's a great way to learn, but I think also forum usage has dropped off a little bit with the newer generations. So I'm curious to know what will replace that, whether it be, we're going to do a TikTok dance to show you how to do a surface. I hope not, but you never know.
I've been working on my moves.
Yeah.
I think it's more of an immediate response for those like YouTube, those types. I think it's just more of a different location than it is a traditional forms page. But Larkin brought up a great example of being, fearful of content being stolen or reused from a locking down standpoint. And we're creating some stuff here at A2G, just so you're aware, from an IP development end for that. But that's always a question, and always come back full circle. From a PDF standpoint, you can lock it down as much as you want, but you can always unlock a PDF. There's a way, and grab content that way too. So I think we're in that digital world of, is there a better way to own our proprietary content but still have it out there? I don't know. Or is that something we have to live with, that just being a known thing, right? I don't know. That was more of like, hey, what do you all think?
Right. No, but yeah, what Larkin was saying, there's no way to stamp a model. There's no way to secure that. And which brings us back to 2D, yes. Right? You print it out on paper, you get your ink stamp on there, you sign it with a pen. There's a ceremony technically that's happening there to say that you approve of this to go be constructed. But if you give a model, like, here's an email, I hope I get a read receipt,
well, I think it's just it's just a process will have to be created around it. We don't know what that process looks like now, right? But if we had a crystal ball and kind of thought about it, it gets the gears spinning for me of how could we create a deliverable that is some way to lock something down and say, this is what we as a firm have produced as a design intent, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of reviewing agencies now that are accepting digitally signed PDFs. Right. And, that same type of technology should be able to be ported over to models. So we might not be able to keep somebody from stealing it. We're never going to be able to keep people from stealing it. There's always that analog loophole, right? We have to consume the data via an analog method, right? Whether it's through looking at it, listening to it, right? That's why movies will always be, piratable. But we've got the technology now for, PDFs. I'm sure we'll be able to apply that same type of technology to models. Mm-hmm. So that if the model is changed, then the signature is no longer valid. And so, we can say, which model were you using to build from? Well, this one. Well, that was not the official one that I digitally signed. Mm-hmm. So, but I got that one. How do we keep people from easily stealing that data out of there? I don't know.
Yeah, that's for a different sort of brain trust, I think.
Yeah.
But so you were talking, Brian, about being more knowledgeable, in terms of the solution, right? The software aspect. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that's definitely a huge push you would tell younger engineers, or just, and I'm not saying age-wise, I meant just like your position, right? You can be an EIT at any age, doesn't matter. Would you suggest that for those folks to also be aware of the software that they're going to be leveraging and where the industry is going with software?
So when I started using my desktop, I was using it as a design tool, right? I wasn't using it as a drafting tool necessarily. It was a design tool. It allowed me to do my designs better, faster, more accurately. It was a tool that I, as an engineer, used. And then Civil 3D came out, and it was a much, much better tool. But still, Land Desktop was a great design tool. And a lot of people look at, CAD as, oh, that's drafting. I'm an engineer. I don't do drafting, right? But, I can't imagine trying to grade a site without feature lines. Mm-hmm. It's just mind-blowing. I've done it. I don't want to do it again, because I spent so much time drawing contours that I would then pass off to the drafter and they would draft them. Like, why don't I just draw them myself in the program? And then why don't I just model it and let the program draw the contours for me? And so I like to think of these programs as design tools that will also do drafting. And if you model well enough, most of the drafting is just a byproduct of the design.
Hmm.
You know, as
Bingo.
I'm changing my design, all my contours are updating. That drafting is just a byproduct of the design. And yes, there will still be some, you know, like red line drafting. And so I don't think the drafter career is necessarily going away. It's just won't be as prominent as it was.
Right. And that's always fascinating, right? You said if you're doing the model right, the drafting is the byproduct. But
Mhm.
I still think there's something to the, hey, if I'm drawing contours with a red pen on paper, I feel like I'm doing more engineering. I feel like I'm
Right.
doing more math. Do you feel like the engineering is simplified too much by using the digital platform to just, hey, Civil 3D, go do your thing, versus actually drawing out lines with a marker? Like, when you went to school to become an engineer, do you feel like you're cheating a little bit?
I don't know. Because you still have to have the understanding of, you know, basic grading concept. I was never taught grading in college. You know, that's not something I was taught. It's just something they were like, oh yeah, make sure it grades. Well, what do I do? Well, make sure the slope is steep enough and not too steep. And oh, okay. And use your rubber band to draw your contours. I don't know if you put a
Mhm.
10 ticks on a
Mhm.
rubber band, you can stretch it to do your contours at different intervals. Just anyways. But you know, I was never taught any of that. So that was all on the job training for me. So it was even the majority of the design work that I did, I never learned in school. Um, you know, being a general civil, the drainage, yeah, I learned how to do unit hydrograph,
Mhm.
but I never learned how to use the swim software that the reviewing agencies required that I used. And so, you know, it's like, do engineers feel like they're cheating the system if they're using HECRAS? No.
Right.
Why do we have that same kind of feeling towards, you know, like the other design programs as well, like Civil 3D? So
Yeah, it's funny. You go to school for civil engineering and you might take a semester of some sort of CAD thing, not knowing that you're going to spend most of your career behind the computer, you know, in Civil 3D that you didn't even learn when you got your degree.
right.
It's just wild to me that
So
we don't engage more digital during that process.
so a fun little story I like to tell people about myself is the very first CAD based class I was ever in, any CAD based training of any sort that I was ever in, was a Civil 3D class that I taught.
Okay, you're gonna have to unpack that. That's just wild.
Yeah. How does that
I was
happen?
I was completely self-taught. The company that I worked for in college, no CAD training at all. All right, got to my first job. They threatened to take away my computer because I was using it too much.
Hmm.
And I did not get the opportunity to have any training. And then I joined the resellers, and they were like, "Oh, you're going to teach Civil 3D. Here's the book. Go teach it." And
Mm.
so the first CAD-based class I was ever in was a class that I taught.
Wow. How did that first class go?
I don't remember. I don't think there were very many people in it, which was good. But I think it went okay. It was, like I said, the first class I'd ever taught, and I did
So
the best I could. But
so how long were you in industry before you went to the consulting part of the industry?
so I did design for about 8 years,
And
and
are you
then I
still
was
in the
in
consulting part of the industry?
no.
Okay.
So I did that for about 12 years, and then I've now been at GEI for about 4 years. So I'm the CAD manager at an international engineering firm. I
Okay.
say international because we have offices in Canada.
What made you switch back from the consulting part of the industry back to industry?
I wasn't happy where I was anymore. The company that I was at got bought out by another company, and it just wasn't a good fit for me,
Okay.
the new company. And I had this great opportunity to show up at GEI, and I'm like, I can't turn that down. It was a nice pay raise, lot less travel. I enjoy traveling. I enjoyed the traveling that I did, but less travel. It was nice. The office was a lot closer to the home than where I was before. Yeah, it was about the time when all of the training started going online as well for the reseller channels, right? For the consultings. And I hated that. I have such a hard time training people online, because it's like I'm talking to a blank screen for 4 hours or 8 hours or however long the training is. There's so little feedback that I get from folks.
Yeah, we've talked about that when we had Scott on. Like, the virtual training is different, and now I think most folks have a better understanding of, like, cameras on, microphone, the ability to take over screens. But I think there was that gray area where it was totally an abyss of, is somebody multitasking? Are they not listening? Or are they not attentive? Right. And I think that was definitely a hard transition for a lot of folks. In that adoption that we now have for virtual training, and we're finally at the point where most folks, I would say, see it fruitful, but there are folks that still want in person. We still offer in person training.
I think in person training is by far better than online training.
Oh yeah.
I travel around the country to our different offices to do training, because I am a firm believer that you get so much more out of being in person. There's just so many visual clues saying, yeah, this person's getting it, this person's not, they're getting distracted because they don't understand it. I can walk around the room, see how people are doing. It's just so much better to be in person than it is online.
So the visual clues is a big part, right? So I've done a lot of in-person training as well, and you can totally hear you can hear the keys get hit a little bit harder.
Yeah.
You can see and hear things in person that just don't come over Zoom. And then you're able to just pull them aside, like, hey, at lunch break, let me show you this thing. Or, hey, let's stay after a little bit. Let's figure this out. Like, where did things go wrong? Because it is very difficult. And if you are someone who is interested in or does, virtual training, do go check out our other episode with Scott Koenig from Bluebeam from a couple months ago. Really good stuff there with some of his tips. But I think we are starting.
I took a BCI with him.
Yeah, he's great. I think there is a little bit more of a resurgence in the whole, coming back to in-person training because of Zoom fatigue and Teams fatigue, and that whole, like, I know I'm spending a lot of money for training, and how do you know people aren't just on their phone or doing something else? If you put everybody in a room and get them trained, it certainly makes a difference. I know that's what we do here at ATG. That's why next week I'll be traveling to our headquarters to train all our new hires that are coming in. Right.
I have big feelings about this, but
yeah,
you can keep going. It's
it's important.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's the best part about virtual training to me is that you're going to get the most out of it of what you want to gain from it. Right. So already out the gate, if you're not willing or wanting to learn, that's going to be detrimental to how you learn virtually. You can't change that. There's a better shift, I will say, in person, of being able to force feed somebody information that way than you would get online, because they can definitely tune out in comparison. But that also weeds out those folks that aren't willing to reinvest in their continuing education or an initial change, right? But with that, there are ways to counteract the inability of not being in person through practice and conversation and question asking. The additional part is folks also see a benefit of time constraints. Not every firm can afford to lock people down in a room for a week to get the training versus training blocks, right? So there's pros and cons, I would say. And I've done both. I've taught in person and I've taught virtually. So I can at least speak to that sense. And maybe it's because my fruition came from more of a switch to the virtual, and I've gone through both. I see benefits to both, pros and cons to both. I think you just have to understand the needs of what you're teaching and what the client you're working with or the team that you're working with what requires, right? Because I will say it just is, it's very, I don't want to say one way is right or wrong. They're both great ways to deliver content and give back that knowledge, right? Because you're essentially transitioning knowledge from your brain to someone else's. And I think it just depends on what that person's needs are for them to retain the information. I don't think one is worse than the other. I think it's the person that's getting the information and what they require, right? But that's my feelings. So I'll digress.
Yeah, I agree with you to a point. I think there are certain trainings that are better one way than the other. You know, like update trainings, you know, where people have a good understanding of the software already. And this is just, hey, here's some new features. Let's get you this new information. Online, yeah, absolutely, no problem. A brand new concept, I think, is much better done in person, because people, at least in my experience, people are much more likely to open up and ask questions if it's not online. So,
yeah, and I will say, out of all the softwares that I've learned, I would much rather personally learn Civil 3D in person, and I did when I was in an academic phase of my life, and I probably would have never learned Civil 3D is from experience a different beast than some of the other software solutions out there. So.
And I think David just hit a good point in the chat. Like in person, you have the side conversations, but not only do you have the side conversations, you have people sitting side by side. Let me look at your screen and see what you're doing, right? Oh, how did you do that? Some of that sort of thing, not only does it make the group tighter and being able to fully understand, but they get to reteach what they just learned. And that helps you, you know, really helps you absorb it and know it better, right? So I love that sort of interaction where we can get people in a big conference room. And when you see that, you know, as an instructor, you did something right, even if somebody fell behind, right? Because somebody else is already feeling confident enough to go say, oh, no, go do this right here. That's fantastic. And there's just no way to do that on Zoom.
Yeah. I think the worst experience I ever had being an instructor, I had two people in my class and one of them fell asleep.
Oof. Rough.
What'd you do?
I let the guy sleep.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the guy, he obviously needed the sleep, but if it was, at least it wasn't one-on-one training. So,
yeah,
that was the same class when I would ask a pointed question to the two people, and I was responded with silence. It was just like, it was like training online.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think being trainers is definitely a hard groove to break through that point of realizing, you know, that some folks just aren't there to learn, and it's not on you as an instructor. There's only so much you can do as an instructor to give back and transition that knowledge to someone. And then at that point, it's hard for me because I take things to heart, and I think it's just because I'm an emotional person. But you know, like, it's not you. It's not your fault, Brian, that gentleman fell asleep, right? You know, you're not. It's not the way you're executing on the training. So I think it's definitely something. Some of those times that you have to wear a shield and just move forward with it, because what you don't want it to do is then ruff your feathers, and then you are not giving the correct or beneficial information to that individual that is wanting to learn, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I've been training for 6 or 7 years by that point. So
no, yeah, I was just saying, like, for other people that are maybe newer, like, don't let it change your mindset in that,
Yeah,
in
it's
that
a great,
moment.
great
right?
point.
Yeah.
It is easy to get rattled, you know, and that does sort of throw you off your game a little bit. So you need to learn how to not just get the thicker skin, but how to deflect it and how to recover quickly.
Yep.
Right. And I think I mentioned before in the Scott episode where like I've taught to an empty chair. I can see the cameras on. I saw that person just left, but it's a one-on-one training and I'm getting paid by the hour. So I got to keep going. Right. And since it's recorded, all right, empty chair. Did you get that last step? Cool. Let's keep going. You know,
Right.
it's, you know, it's their boss is paying the bill. So you got to do what you can. You can't just say, hey, they left. So that's probably worse than falling asleep, but it's in the same vein.
Yeah.
What would you say, Brian, to new folks? Or well, let's take it, because I always bring up new folks, experienced folks in the industry. You know, what are some recommendations in terms of finding a place to call home, their work environment? Recommendations on what they're looking for if they're searching, or, you know, what is a good position that you felt has given you tenfold? Is it that CAD manager position because you're able to teach, give back, still do engineering, and also work? What do you think is a good hybrid type of position?
I really love the career path that I chose. I enjoy doing design, but I didn't enjoy.
But we'll start it back. It said you
Oh,
stopped right where it says I didn't enjoy what?
I didn't enjoy the other stuff, the reviewing agencies, dealing with the clients, the contractors, those sorts of things. I have the personality where I have
Wait,
a
you didn't like
tendency to
calls all the
avoid.
time?
Yeah, I have a tendency to avoid conflict, right? And so it didn't work well for me. My boss in that first company I worked for, he absolutely loved it. He thrived off of it. He would play games with the people that were trying to summons him, deliver him summons for a lawsuit, right? He loved it, absolutely. You know, he looked forward to going to court. Me, not so much. And so I, making a switch into the consulting realm, I got into a place where I could still play with the design and the tools, but I didn't have to deal with that other stuff. And so for me, it was the best of both worlds, because I got to deal with people that wanted my services instead of being told by the city that they had to have my service. Right? Because I always think of civil engineering as, you know, being thought of as the necessary evil. It's like, I don't want to do a drainage report. I don't think I should have to do a drainage report, but the city's making me do a drainage report. So Brian, do a drainage report for me. Don't charge me a lot of money. Don't make my project really expensive. And oh, by the way, I need it Thursday. Right. And so that was the aspect that I didn't like. I always thought, I think if I hadn't gone into the consulting firm, I probably would have gone back to school to try to get a position where I could teach in a college.
Okay, so from like an academic sense,
Yeah.
in teaching, okay, and giving back that way.
I
So
really love the technical aspect. I love the science, the engineering aspect of it. That's really where I thrived. I mean, I watch math YouTube videos for fun, to give you an idea of how sad my life truly is.
Oh
Right?
boy.
you know, I watch fish YouTube videos for fun, so
Yeah.
that's how sad my life is. But back to that. So then
Yeah.
you leaving the
And-
reseller, right? So that was like your passion, right? You found out that you didn't have to be summons, and that wasn't your groove.
Mhm.
But with that, right, going back into industry, was there a fear? Was there you were going to be back in that same regiment, or was that kind of snuffed out of like, hey, this is what I want to do here, that type of thing?
Yeah, so being here, the CAD manager here at GEI, it was very much what I was doing as at the consulting firm, but just for one company. Which is nice in one sense and downer on the other, because I really loved getting out and experiencing all these different firms and what they are doing, and that's really what helped me learn so much about the industry in general. Here at GEI, we're very geotech focused. So we do a
Hmm.
lot of, dams and supportive excavation, and we also have a big ecology section, so stream restoration, those types of things. So I don't get to dabble in as much of the other stuff anymore, but it's still, I get out, I help people, I train people, I'm making videos, I'm doing, work on our standards, I help people develop workflows. And so I still get to do a lot of the stuff that I was doing as a consultant, but now just for GEI. And then I also get to help out on projects as well. So, which is kind of getting back into, I do some of the modeling for some of the projects. I am not a drafter. I do not have that skill set. I learned recently that I do not have the ability to picture things in my head. So, like if you, have somebody say, hey, can you close your eyes and picture an apple? Apparently, some people can actually picture an apple. I see black.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of an apple right now, and I don't even have to close my eyes.
Yeah, I cannot picture things in my head. And so what makes a set of drawings look good, I don't have that skill set. But I can model like you wouldn't believe.
Hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah, because I think I'm backwards. I can draft like nobody's business, but modeling, sometimes I struggle because I also obviously started as a drafter versus starting on the other side of things. But and you mentioned, being at GEI, you get to be a CAD manager for one firm, but don't you think that that's some outlet or inlet that you've got is with your civil chat later on today, is that you get to have that opportunity to have more people bring you some stuff. So it still hangs on a little bit to that. You don't know it's coming from the outside world stuff that keeps you on your toes.
Yeah. And that's why I love civil chat so much. I love it when people ask me questions and my first response is, I don't know. Because it drives me to figure it out. And I was like, okay, I've never encountered this scenario before. What is the best way to model it? What is the best way to work? What is a good workflow for this? Those types of things. And that's really one of the things that drives me, is that I don't know. And that's one thing, you're asking earlier, what would I recommend to my younger self? I think that I would tell my younger self that I don't know is a valid answer.
Absolutely.
We preach that all the time here. It's best to always, if you don't know the answer to something, say it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing from our industry. We're very accepting of that, where others it may not be. But here, like, that is value, knowing that you don't know that answer and you're being honest to me and you're not giving me some junk.
Right.
And Doug and Katrina basically said, add yet to the end of that. I don't know yet. I'll find out. And when I'm interviewing people, that's one thing that I always try to do, is I try to get to a point where I ask a question that they don't know the answer to, because I want to see what the response is to something that they don't know.
That's exactly what we do here too.
I don't want somebody to make up an answer. And I've had people do that before and they did not get hired.
Right. That's always the worst.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of our time. So if you want to see if you can get Brian to say, I don't know, you get to tune in later at the civil chat. So the link is in our chat in the webinar.
Throw it in again. So it's at the front. Sorry,
we'll also
my head itches. I got sunburn.
We'll put it in the description for the Spotify episode as well. Certainly check it out. First Tuesday of every month at 11:30 Mountain Time. I will probably see you over there today, as well as some of our other MCR folks. But Brian, thank you so much for having our little civil chat morning coffee review, Espresso Yourself crossover today. Always great to talk to you.
Likewise.
And we will see you again soon, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
See ya.